The termination letter felt like a shard of ice in my hand. "Poor teamwork," it read. A laughable, insulting lie. For 20 years at Sterling and Finch, my back had a permanent ache from carrying my so-called team across every finish line. David, the junior partner I'd mentored, slid a cardboard box across the vast mahogany desk, refusing to meet my gaze. "It's a board decision, Liam," he mumbled, his voice betraying the lie. It was his decision. I knew it. As I walked out of that gleaming Chicago high-rise for the last time, I wasn't just a 48-year-old man out of a job. I was a weapon. They took my keycard, but they couldn't take my relationships. Or my phone. My phone felt heavy, a lifeline to a new reality. I didn't go home. I went to a quiet bar on the river, the kind with dark wood and old ghosts, and ordered a whiskey. I dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang once. "It's done," I said. "No preamble needed." Marcus Thorne's voice came through, crisp and predatory. "Excellent. Sterling and Finch won't know what hit them. Welcome to Thorne Advisory, Liam." Marcus was my exact opposite, a shark in a tailored suit who valued results above all else. He'd been trying to poach me for years. Now, he was getting me, and a whole lot more, for free. "David's in charge now," I told him, swirling the amber liquid. "He's got the smile, but not the strategy. He can't handle the AeroCorp account without me." AeroCorp, the crown jewel, a $60 million a year contract I had personally built from a handshake deal. David's first major presentation to their board was in 2 weeks. He believed my notes were his safety net. "Let him try," Marcus chuckled. "You have a meeting with AeroCorp's CEO tomorrow at 10. He hung up. My revenge wasn't just a plan, it was already in motion. The whiskey burned, but not as much as the memory of David's face. Not the treacherous mask he wore today, but the face of the kid I'd found 7 years ago. He was just an analyst then, drowning in a sea of spreadsheets. But he had a spark. I saw it. I pulled him from the junior pool, gave him a desk outside my office, and taught him everything. I taught him how to read a balance sheet, but more importantly, how to read a room. I remembered the Odyssey project, a logistical nightmare for a global shipping client. I spent 3 sleepless weeks in a windowless room, mapping out a supply chain overhaul that would save them 9 figures. I handed the finished strategy to David, a 100-page blueprint for success. "Walk them through this," I'd told him. "You know the material." He did more than that. He presented it as his own. I watched from the back of the boardroom as Old Man Sterling clapped him on the shoulder. "That's the kind of initiative we reward, son." Sterling had boomed. David just smiled, a quick, guilty glance in my direction before he basked in the unearned glory. That was the first time I felt the cold edge of his ambition. He was my protege, my team, and he was already learning to take the credit while I did the work. Poor teamwork, they called it. The irony was a physical ache. My real team wasn't in that office. My team was with my clients, especially AeroCorp. I landed them not in a boardroom, but over a cracked vinyl booth in a diner near O'Hare. Their CEO, Robert Vance, was about to pull the plug on negotiations. The previous team had botched it, promising the moon and delivering a pile of rocks. I sat with him for 3 hours, armed with nothing but a fountain pen and a stack of napkins. I didn't sell him a pre-packaged solution. I listened. I sketched out a real, actionable plan right there on the table. He shook my hand and said, "I'm not hiring your firm, Liam. I'm hiring you." Over the years, Robert and I built more than a contract. We built trust. We'd talk about our kids, about the woes of Chicago sports, about the future of his industry. He trusted my judgment implicitly. David knows the numbers in the AeroCorp file. He has my slides and my meticulously crafted talking points. But he doesn't have Robert's trust. He doesn't have the years of shared confidences and napkin-sketched promises I always delivered on. He thinks my notes are the key. He has no idea the lock is a relationship he can't even see. Tomorrow at 10, I wasn't just going to a meeting. I was going to collect on a debt of loyalty. And David was about to learn the difference between a strategy on paper and a man's word. The next morning, the air in the university club's library was thick with the scent of old leather and quiet money. Robert Vance didn't look up from his newspaper when I sat down. He just folded it precisely in half. "You're 10 minutes early, Liam. Something's wrong." He motioned for the waiter. "2 coffees. Black." I didn't waste time. "I'm no longer with Sterling and Finch, as of yesterday afternoon." Robert's expression didn't change, but his eyes hardened. "They fired you." It wasn't a question. "Who's the fool who signed off on that?" "David," I said. The name felt like ash in my mouth. "He's a partner now. He's taking over your account." A dry, humorless laugh escaped Robert's lips. "The kid? The one who carries your briefcase and nods at the right times? Liam, I hired you." "The firm was just the letterhead." "He thinks the letterhead is enough," I countered. "He's presenting to your board in 2 weeks. He has all my files, my projections, the whole playbook." Robert leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "So what's our move?" This was the moment. This was the pivot on which my old life broke and my new one began. Our move is to let him walk right into the line of fire. The strategy he has is 98% complete. It's brilliant, if I do say so myself. But there's a flaw. A single fatal assumption I hadn't yet corrected. I took a sip of water. The entire expansion plan is predicated on a specific cost model for sourcing cobalt from the DRC. That model is based on their existing export tariffs. And, Robert prompted, his gaze sharp. And 3 days ago, their government quietly ratified a new resource nationalization bill. It doubles the export tariff. Effective immediately. I let that hang in the air. The news hasn't hit the major wires yet, but it's in the diplomatic chatter. The kind of thing a lead consultant is paid to know. The kind of thing I would have updated before presenting. Robert's smile was a slow, predatory thing, so his numbers are worthless. Worse than worthless, I corrected. They're a lie, a multi-million-dollar lie he's going to confidently present to your board as gospel. He won't even know he's lying. He trusts my old notes more than he trusts his own diligence. I slid a single sheet of paper from my briefcase. It was from Thorne Advisory. On it was a revised plan, accounting for the new tariff, with a leaner, more aggressive logistics solution. "Let him give his speech," I said. "Let him get to the part about long-term profitability. Then, Robert, I just need you to ask him one simple question." I leaned in closer. "Ask him, how does your model account for the revised Congolese export duties ratified this week? And then you just watch." Robert picked up the new proposal, barely glancing at it. He was looking at me, a glint of sheer, unadulterated admiration in his eyes. "Consider it done," he said, his voice a low rumble. "And, Liam, send me an invitation. I'm clearing my schedule. I wouldn't miss this for the world. My revenge wouldn't be a loud, messy explosion. It would be a quiet, surgical strike, delivered in a boardroom, disguised as a simple question. David wouldn't be fired. He would be dismantled, piece by piece, in front of the very people he was trying to impress. He stole my work to build his career. I was about to use my work to end it. The next 2 weeks were a study in professional restraint. My new office at Thorne Advisory was a stark contrast to Sterling and Finch's mahogany and brass mausoleum. It was all glass, steel, and hunger. Marcus didn't care about tradition, he cared about momentum. He gave me a team of 3 sharp, young analysts who didn't need mentoring, just direction. They saw me not as a relic, but as a legend. While David was presumably rehearsing my old lines in front of a mirror, I was building my new foundation. I spent the time dissecting the portfolio of another potential Thorne client. A mid-cap tech firm, S&F, had deemed too volatile. I found their pressure point, drafted a 3-page pitch, and within a week, Marcus and I were shaking hands on a new 8-figure contract. It was a statement. My value wasn't tied to AeroCorp. My value was M.E. Dyer. Not once did my phone ring with a Sterling and Finch number. No panicked calls from junior associates. No questions from David. The silence was deafening, and more damning than any accusation. It was the sound of absolute arrogance. David truly believed he had it all. He had my files, my data, my voice. He thought he'd photocopied the master key, not realizing it was just a blank. The day before the AeroCorp board meeting, Marcus stopped by my office. He leaned against the doorframe, a sleek silhouette against the city lights. "Heard through the grapevine they're expecting a home run tomorrow," he said, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. David's apparently been telling everyone he's got a revolutionary new direction for the AeroCorp partnership. "It is revolutionary," I replied, not looking up from my screen. "It's just not his." "Any last-minute nerves?" Marcus asked. I finally turned, offering a thin smile. "David's the one giving the speech. I'm just an audience member. Robert Vance sent the invitation this morning. Front row seat." Marcus chuckled, a low, appreciative sound. "Some men use a hammer for revenge, Liam. You're using a scalpel. It's a work of art." He left me to the quiet hum of my computer. I didn't feel vengeful. I felt calm. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a strategic acquisition. David had mistaken my knowledge for a commodity he could steal. Tomorrow, in front of everyone who mattered, he was going to learn that my real value, my real work, was the thinking he never saw, the relationships he couldn't build, and the devastating details he was too arrogant to check for himself. The trap wasn't just set. He was already marching toward it, whistling a happy tune. The AeroCorp boardroom was on the 50th floor, a glass box suspended over Chicago. It was designed to make you feel powerful, on top of the world. From my seat in the back, invited as a special consultant by Robert Vance, I felt like a spectator in a Roman Colosseum waiting for the lions. David entered, flanked by 2 junior analysts from Sterling and Finch who looked terrified. He didn't. He looked polished, his suit impeccable, his smile predatory. He saw me, and for a fraction of a second, his smile tightened. It wasn't surprise. It was contempt. He thought I was here to witness his triumph, the final nail in my coffin. He nodded at me, a dismissive, patronizing gesture. I gave him nothing back. He began. And damn him, he was good. He'd studied my cadence, my rhythm. He used my jokes, my anecdotes. He presented my slides with a fluid confidence that, for a moment, almost made me believe he'd created them. He laid out the problem, the market forces, the operational challenges. He was a perfect mimic, an actor playing the role of a strategist. The board members were captivated, leaning forward, nodding along to the familiar beats of my intellectual property. I watched Robert Vance, who sat impassive at the head of the long table, his face an unreadable granite slab. David clicked to the final section, the 5-year growth path and profitability. This was it, the heart of the lie. He walked them through the projections, the beautiful, upward-curving hockey stick graphs. He spoke of 9-figure returns, of market dominance, all built on a foundation of sand. "As you can see," he concluded, his voice ringing with triumph, "this isn't just a plan, it's a guarantee. A new era of prosperity for AeroCorp, spearheaded by Sterling and Finch." He closed his laptop with a soft, definitive click, basking in the glow of my stolen work. "I'd be happy to take any questions." A wave of appreciative murmurs filled the room. One board member was already whispering to another, smiling. David's chest puffed out. He scanned the room, his eyes daring someone to challenge his flawless victory. Then, Robert Vance cleared his throat. The sound cut through the room like a razor. Every head turned to him. "Impressive figures, David," Robert said, his voice deceptively mild. "I just have one small point of clarification." He picked up a pen, tapping it once on the table. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. "Your entire cost model for the supply chain relies heavily on sourcing from the Democratic Republic of Congo. So my question is this: how does your model account for the revised Congolese export duties ratified this week?" Silence. It wasn't a gradual quiet. It was instantaneous, as if the room's oxygen had been sucked out. David's triumphant smile froze, then faltered. He blinked, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. He clearly thought he'd misheard. The duties," he stammered, his smooth delivery shattering. "Yes," Robert said, his voice hardening, losing all its previous warmth. "The new tariff structure. The one that doubles the cost of cobalt exports. It wasn't exactly a state secret. Surely a firm of your caliber factored that in." David's face went from pale to ghostly white. His eyes darted down to his closed laptop, as if the answer might magically appear on the blank screen. He was a swimmer who just realized the shore was a painted backdrop. He had no notes on this, no contingency. My files, his holy grail, were silent on the matter. That's an emerging detail," David fumbled, his voice suddenly thin and reedy. "Our risk analysis team has flagged it. It's well within the projected margin of error." It was a pathetic bluff, and everyone in the room knew it. The board members were no longer smiling. Their expressions had hardened into masks of suspicion and anger. They were looking at David not as a visionary, but as a fool. Or a liar. Robert leaned forward, the final predator closing in. "A 100% cost increase is within your margin of error, David? Your entire profitability projection just became a 9-figure loss. You didn't present a strategy, you presented a fantasy." David opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He just stood there, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a cheap costume. The two junior analysts behind him looked like they wanted the floor to swallow them whole. In the span of a single question, he had gone from partner in waiting to pariah. Robert Vance stood up, his chair scraping back harshly. It was a signal. The meeting was over. "Thank you for your time," Robert said, the words dripping with ice. It was the most brutal dismissal I had ever witnessed. He didn't even look at David again. He turned his gaze toward the back of the room, directly at me. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a signal of victory. It was a business transaction. Message received. Problem solved. The board members began packing their briefcases, a low rumble of angry, disappointed conversation filling the air. No one looked at David. He was invisible. A ghost already haunting the boardroom where his career had just died. I stood and walked toward the exit, my footsteps quiet on the plush carpet. I didn't look at him. I didn't need to. I could feel his stare burning into my back, a desperate, horrified gaze that finally understood. He hadn't just been outmaneuvered. He had been surgically, precisely, and publicly dismantled by the very tools he thought he had stolen. He took my job, so I took his future. It was a fair trade. As I stepped into the elevator, my phone buzzed. It was another client from my Sterling and Finch portfolio. The text was simple. "Heard there was some drama at AeroCorp. Got time for a coffee tomorrow? We need to talk." The trap had been sprung. Now it was time to collect the prizes. The elevator doors slid open onto a bustling lobby, a world away from the tomb-like silence I'd left on the 50th floor. My phone buzzed again. It wasn't a text this time. The caller ID read, Helena Vance, Robert's daughter, and the COO of AeroCorp. I answered. "Liam," she said, her voice crisp and devoid of emotion. "My father said to call you. The board has invoked the consultant competency clause in your old contract. Sterling and Finch is terminated, effective immediately. Send Marcus Thorne's standard engagement letter to my office. We'll have it signed by end of day." There was no celebration in her tone. It was business. Utterly brutal, efficient business. "It'll be on your desk within the hour," I replied, my own voice steady. As I stepped out into the biting Chicago wind, the first domino hadn't just fallen, it had shattered, taking the entire first row with it. The "Coffee tomorrow" text was from Mark Renard of Phoenix Logistics. I met him at 7 a.m. the next morning. He looked like he hadn't slept. "Liam, the street talks," he said, skipping the pleasantries. "Word is, David presented a strategy to AeroCorp that would have bankrupted them. Is that true?" I didn't need to confirm or deny. I just slid a single folder across the table. "This is the risk analysis I was preparing for your Q4 review. The one David told you wasn't a priority. Look at page 3. The supply chain vulnerability in Southeast Asia. It's the same pattern." I didn't have to say another word. He was staring at the same fatal flaw David had missed with AeroCorp, just with a different client's name on it. He looked up at me, his face pale. "Can Thorne Advisory take us on?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "We're already there," I said. By noon, my calendar was a war map. The calls came one after another. Panicked VPs, concerned directors. The news of the AeroCorp implosion was a virus, and my name was the only antidote. They all told the same story, a rambling, incoherent call from David, followed by an unnerving silence from the senior partners at Sterling and Finch. The firm wasn't just bleeding, it was hemorrhaging, and their leadership had gone into hiding. Each call was a variation on a theme. "We hired you, Liam. We trust you. Where you go, we go." I didn't have to poach them. They were refugees, fleeing a burning building, and I was the only one with an exit plan. That evening, Marcus took me for a celebratory dinner at a steakhouse, where deals were signed on cocktail napkins. As we were leaving, I saw him, Old Man Sterling, the founding partner, sitting alone in a corner booth, staring into a glass of scotch. He looked smaller, diminished, the titan of industry reduced to a tired old man. Our eyes met across the crowded room. There was no anger in his gaze, only a dawning, horrified understanding. He finally saw the truth. I wasn't just an employee they had fired. I was the load-bearing wall they had just dynamited. He looked away, back into his drink, a captain who had finally realized his ship was sinking, not because of an iceberg, but because he'd handed the helm to a fool. The final, most critical piece was OmniHealth. Their 9-figure account was the second pillar of Sterling and Finch's consulting practice. Their CEO, Eleanor Vance, no relation to Robert, but just as shrewd, was notoriously loyal. I was preparing my approach when she called me directly, bypassing Marcus entirely. "Liam," she started, her voice like honed steel. "I've had a very interesting day. First, a babbling, panicked call from David, trying to proactively reassure me. Then, a slick pitch from Marcus Thorne about his firm's new star player. I don't like games. The S&F partnership is built on your work. The only question is whether that work continues under a new letterhead. What do you have for me that's better than what I've already got?" This was the real test. Not just salvaging a relationship, but proving my value beyond what they already knew. "Eleanor," I said, walking over to the window of my new office, looking down at the city lights. "The 5-year plan I built for you is solid. It's also obsolete. It was based on the assumption that your primary competitor would acquire medtech innovations to lock up the European market. A reasonable assumption," she countered. "Their bid is all but public." "It's a head fake," I said. "I had dinner with a source from Berlin last week. The medtech deal is a smokescreen. Your competitor is actually making a play for a smaller, more agile biotech firm in Singapore. They're not trying to win in Europe. They're trying to make you think they are, while they flank you in Asia. The plan David has in his hands will walk you right into an ambush." Silence on the other end of the line. It was. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken millions. When Eleanor finally spoke, her voice was a weapon. "And how, exactly, would you know that, Liam?" "I can't give you my source," I said calmly, "but I can give you the target, a Singapore firm called Biosynth Dynamics. Have your people look into their recent patent filings and the travel logs of their senior executives. The truth is there, Eleanor, waiting for someone diligent enough to find it. Someone who doesn't just read the notes, but understands the game." Another pause, shorter this time. I could almost hear the gears turning in her mind, calculating the risk of my lie versus the cost of David's incompetence. "The Sterling and Finch contract is nullified," she said, the decision final. "Send Marcus your paperwork, and Liam, don't make me regret this." I didn't. Within 3 days, OmniHealth was a Thorn Advisory client, and Sterling and Finch had lost the last pillar holding up its crumbling roof. The firm, I heard later, was being quietly dismantled and sold for parts. The call I was expecting finally came a week later. The caller ID showed a blocked number. I knew who it was. "You ruined me." David's voice was a ragged whisper, stripped of all its polished confidence. "You took everything." I stood and walked to the vast window of my new office, looking down at the river snaking through the city. "No, David," I said, my voice even, devoid of malice. "I didn't take anything you didn't first try to steal. You stood on my shoulders to get a better view, then kicked me away." "It was just business," he choked out, the words pathetic. "No," I corrected him. "Business is what I did with Robert Vance, with Eleanor. We built on trust and results. What you did was theft. You took my work, you took my trust, and you tried to take my name. You thought my knowledge was a file you could copy and paste, but you forgot the most important part, the thinking, the relationships, the integrity. You weren't fired for poor teamwork, David. You were fired for being a bad investment." And the market finally corrected. I ended the call. There was no triumph, no elation, just the quiet, solid feeling of a debt settled in full. My revenge was complete, not because I had destroyed him, but because I had proven who I was. And in the process, revealed him for what he'd always been, an empty suit, finally exposed to the world. So, was I wrong for taking the clients? Or did my old company get exactly what they deserved? Let me know what you think in the comments.